We're live again. I'll try this on the vertical. So, I just tried to go live and it messed me up. Gear once again. I love that. I'm trying to do a live stream and even the live stream gear messes up. This time it was actually the computer that destroyed me. So I don't really have enough time. I only have like 45 minutes. So I thought I would just go live with this one. Because YouTube has been talking so much about how this is supposed to be the next big thing, you know, with live on vertical. So let's just try it and see if it does any difference to, you know, the landscape format. But let's just get right into it. So gear for documentaries, it's really, it's when you look at gear, you look at it as like this big controversial thing. Gear comes down to like a simple reasoning for using whatever gear you choose. It's how to tell a story, right? The big question is, why do we obsess so much about gear when everybody knows that like actually like it's all about just telling great stories, but we still do like everything to get in our way, like our own way, when it comes to gear. So I just want to talk a little bit about gear and how people, you know, can do less with more and to start with what you have, because that's what it's all about in the end. And like this in itself, I started with little gear. I started with like cameras that was really limited, and it just evolved. By the time that I had done like a lot of commercials and stuff, I'd gotten a hold of like better cameras. But in the beginning I didn't have that. I just had like the simplest type of gear. I had just a DV camera for a while, and the fascinating thing for me was that like most of the stuff that I did, I was trying to get away from the establishment. So I was only working with a lot of the limited gear that nobody else would want to use. I used that. And I used it because like that was the only thing that I felt was easy to use, and it was the type of gear that you could feel in control of. And I think that's like the essential part, is that any gear that you buy, anything that you are using to tell a story, it really has to be stuff that it just helps you to tell your story. It's something that makes it more easy for you to tell your story. That's what everything comes down to. And for me, that's not about like the high-end cameras. Like, what is it for you? Let me know in the comments. But for me, like that's never been the thing. Like using the lighting setups like this, now it messed up because the stream in landscape crashed, so now it doesn't look as good. I could dim that down probably because it's too bright, because the iPhone just messes you up. But lighting doesn't do it. Like that doesn't make everything special. And I mean, the quiet moments that you capture, for instance, those can be much more interesting than the fancy camera that captures it. So even though that's like one part of it, is just finding like cameras that you feel comfortable with, cameras and the tools that you need to use. Like everything should just come from whatever necessity that you have to tell your story is really what it should come from. And to capture impactful moments, the gear can't stand in the way of you telling your story. Like any gear that limits you in what story you are trying to tell is the wrong gear. And for me, for instance, now that I've been filming in mountains, running with runners and all that, like the big thing is just getting up on the freaking mountain and like running first 1,000 meters up, and then like that would be probably a day would be like 20K or something. You don't carry an Alexa like that easily. You could, but it's gonna be very strenuous to do that every day. So like to capture the intimate moments, and especially like we go on the training runs that they do, and to be able to do that you need smaller gear. So I shoot a lot on the iPhone. I'm looking now to actually transition over to the DJI, what's it called? Pocket 3, I think. Just because it's a little bit lighter, and it's just made for, you know, moving and shaking. The iPhone is a tiny bit heavy. The upside of shooting on an iPhone is that you have the control over every aspect of like the image, and you can play around with the apps and do so much with just like the log file that you can use. You can shoot in ProRes or whatever format you choose. Those things, I think, for me, they help so much on an iPhone. But it's just, we run a little bit too uneven ground. We run a little bit too fast. So it struggles, the DJI gimbal that we have, which is the mobile version. It struggles a little bit because the phone gets a little bit heavy. And actually for the Pocket 3, DJI Pocket 3, you have filters and stuff. Now, we haven't been able to get a hold of it, so I don't really know because I haven't tried it yet. But it just makes sense to make it easier for me to capture the stories, because what I'm after is the moments on the training runs when something happens. You're out running, you do not know what's going to happen. You can't plan these things. Like my brother was telling me the other day, because he went to Florida. I don't know, is it gators or alligators or crocodiles in Florida? Let me know. Who knows? I think it's gators. It's gators. Anyway, he was there running and filming one of our athletes. And it's hilarious because, like, this is one of the key moments that I'm after. Like, if you plan these things, alligators, told you. Okay, so thank you, Jared. So the thing is, like, you would think that you can arrange these moments. Like, he's out on his training run. He's out in the swamps, I guess. He didn't tell me. Running around with this elite athlete. So the thing that strikes me is that he just ends up in a swamp and there's gators there. Now you could go back, you could reshoot that. Like when you do ads and all that, you plan that, you go back, you have a big crew and all that. Do you capture the moments that are unique, that are the first time this character experiences that? And how crazy that moment is when they all of a sudden are surrounded with gators? No, you do not. That's the thing that gear can bring to shoots, you know? It can really help you to do that. If you think about it in like the way that I think about it is, like, it shouldn't be in the way of how you shoot. Everything should be like easier to capture because you use the gear you use. But for me, that just makes sense to be using the type of cameras that is not in the way, the type of gimbals that is not in the way. And for me, I often shoot on an easy rig. I usually have the Pocket Cinema 4K camera with like a monitor. That's right there. And then zoom lens. Is the zoom lens the best lens? No, it's not. It's not. Is it the most practical? Yes. And that's that lens. It's the 24-105 kit lens from my Canon camera, my Canon days. That's the lens that I use. And when I run with the runners and we're up on the mountains, then I would get the kit lens that I got, I think, for my GH5 camera, because it's just tiny and light. So I would use that and in those moments, because it fits in a bag and the camera fits in a bag. It's so much easier to carry that way. So it's just like, what tool do you need for what you are doing? It's all about that. If you're trying to tell a story, what you really need to think about is like, okay, so this is my story. I would usually like recommend people to go create a mood board first. You go and you create a mood board, pull like images off of any film, my films, and somebody else's films. I would go to like Vimeo staff pics, for instance. It's easy to grab those, like screen grab those images. You create like a mood board, which is basically a board with the images that is capturing the visual style that you're going after. And then you have that, and then you try to define, what am I trying to capture visually? Like, are you using close-ups? Are you using wide shots? Are you what perspective are you trying to convey? Is it from the perspective of the main character? Are you trying to show a group of characters? How are you going to shoot the people? Is it like close-ups of everybody when it's several people in a room, or is it wide shots all the time? So those decisions you try to flesh out by creating a mood board. And then when you have that, when you have the look and you have the idea of, okay, this is what I'm creating, that's when you think about, okay, what gear am I going to use to capture this? What do I need? That's where it starts. And that's always like how you should think about it for every project. It has to start with like, okay, this is my idea of how I want to capture it. Okay, what are the limitations I have from this? Let me move the mic. What limitations do you have that are forced on you? What limitations do you want to put on yourself in terms of like, okay, I want to be running in the mountains with these characters and I can't bring the big kit. I can't be in the way. If I want to capture the intimate personal moments, I have to focus on just capturing all these moments where like things just happen. I want to be there. Okay, so what gear do I need for that? And then like you pick gear from that. It's as simple as that. But I really like just working with the Pocket Cinema 4K camera because it's so easy to use. And I know a lot of people will say like, no, it's terrible. You can't really like use it because it doesn't have autofocus. But I don't use autofocus. I've never used autofocus. I do everything manually, and I think you should too. You should never use autofocus if you're not forced to. If it's not like a shot that is planned to use autofocus, don't use it. Just messes you up. This, for instance, is autofocus. Not really as sharp as I could make it. Maybe if I go closer, though. I don't know. But either way, I think that all that stuff, when it comes to lenses, I pick lenses, like I have the lenses that I love using, which is usually vintage lenses. Those are not practical to use all the time, especially if you're out running gun shooting. It's not practical at all. So those times I would just like ditch the cameras, but the lenses that I like using, even though I love them, I would ditch them because it's not worth the hassle a lot of the time. But then you got to start thinking, okay, so how can I create the same type of look that is the more characteristic? I don't know how to say it. Characteristic. You know what I mean. Either way, if you use filters, for instance, like the Pro Mist filters, they will diffuse the shots. So like even if you have a Sony camera, which has a really harsh, like the iPhone, for instance, really harsh, overly sharp, like this digital look. I'm looking pretty digital now, I imagine. This can be like saved so much in post-production, but you can also use filters for this. You can use, for instance, the Black Pro Mist filters to create like a softening effect. You can get like the lights to be softer in the background. You can create the highlights to roll off a little bit more soft. All those things you can do either in post or you can do it with filters. I have a lot of ways that I like to work with stuff in post just to make the match more with the Pocket Cinema camera, because that's my main camera. And since I shoot a lot of the mixed footage, like you just practice and you start seeing like, oh, this effect is perfect for this. One thing I just discovered like this week when I was grading the latest short film I did for Craft Sportswear's YouTube channel. And it's just, I like using halation. It's an effect in DaVinci Resolve. If you try that, you will know what it is. If you haven't, you should play around with it. It does a similar thing like the Black Pro Mist filters would do. So if you use the halation effect, you can sort of create this more filmic look in the highlights. But there's a setting which is like the detail loss, I think, within halation, and that really like is a magic thing for like this digital look that you have. I don't know, the window, this looks ugly. That type of stuff you can just make look much more nice. Or my face, like the sun is smack in the face. These types of stuff the effects can help with that. It can make it more natural, and it can make it more cinematic. So filters is one thing. Like an ND filter is probably the most important lighting tool that you have, especially if you shoot daylight, like natural light. Natural lighting is what I usually use. I just work with practical lights a lot of the time in the rooms, like lights that are already there, like these. But these are not really practicals. I put them there, but but imagine they were here and I didn't put them there. Then they're called practicals. If you use those, for instance, when you're shooting with natural light, you can like build more of a cinematic feel to every scene. That I also think is key if you're shooting natural light, to just like try to emphasize it. And when it comes to lighting, for instance, and picking the lighting gear, it just comes down to like what's portable, what time do you have, and what style are you going for, and how much money you have. I got this light from GVM, a sponsored light that I'm doing a video about, which is really nice. It's up there. That light can do effects, which is super nice, like lighting and like fire and all types of stuff. Those are nice, and it's a daylight strength type of light. It's the 650, is it S or B? I don't know. Yeah, somebody probably knows. That light, it really can work towards, like, to fight the sun. Those lights are amazing. But that little light behind me is just like this easy Home Depot type of light that you put in the what's it called? It's a Chinese light, China bulb light. I don't know. That type of light can be used also as a light, and it's cheap. So it comes down to how much money do you have, how do you want to use them, and these things are not so difficult. Like, we make lighting out to be more difficult than it has to be, but usually it's about creating depth in a room, like the 3D effect by lighting. Now this is not pretty. It's too bright. But that's because the computer crashed that I was doing the real live stream on. But if you can imagine this being a little bit dimmed down, then it would look pretty. But it's just a matter of like finding the light that's working for your situations. We usually travel with really small, like Westcott flex lights. They're the squared flat ones, just because they're simple to move around with and to fit into the traveling bags when you fly and that type of stuff. Is it my best light? No, definitely not. But I use it because it's the one that you can move everywhere, and you can have it on batteries. So you have like these types of batteries, and you just plug them in, and like it's super simple. That's why I use them. So those are key things to think about as you pick, like, whatever light you pick. Now, my favorite lights is, of course, like these types of lights, the GVM, for instance. Great light. Like, it's kind of expensive, but it's cheap for being a pro light. So it depends on how you look at it. For me, like, compared to renting an HMI, like, this is fantastic. Compared to like the cheaper lights that I have, like, it's heavy. It's like one of those lights that you love using, but you can't carry around when you shoot docs most of the time because it becomes too heavy. So these kinds of things, I think, matters a lot. But also when it comes to the whole look of a film, like it's light that you work with, and it's the camera. So if you're working with natural light, you got to think about, what can I do with natural light with my camera as well? Because if you have a camera that's not light sensitive, like the iPhone, you can't shoot in darker situations because it's gonna start messing up with, like, if you use low ISO, you might not be able to shoot at all because it becomes too dark. If you shoot at high ISO, it might mess everything up. Now, I think either this is the stream or it's just making the ISO really bad on this one, because it's probably too dark or something. Because it should just make me darker. I don't know if can I change that? Maybe I can. No filter. I don't know. Either way, Like that would be something that would be really nice if you added. YouTube, make me control my live stream more. Perhaps even put a LUT in there. That would be amazing. But either way, you got to think about, if I have this type of gear, what can I do with it and what can't I do with it? Maybe you need light because your camera doesn't have the dynamic range. Maybe it doesn't have the type of low light capabilities that you need to shoot the story you're trying to shoot. Then you adapt to that. But then, like jumping to audio, for instance, which is a big thing. Before doing that, I'm just gonna see if we can answer some questions first. But ask me anything about audio if you wanna know more about that. So Jared Cordova, hey Johnny, your sentiment about gear doesn't tell the story, and that focusing on the next shiny toy isn't going to make or break it. DJI Osmo Pocket 3, it's 1-inch sensor. I found more often than not the gear gets in the way of my process, as Adrian. I get flustered with too many choices or too many things in my hand around me. The less gear I have, the more I can focus. Yeah, that's very true, I think. You're almost like describing, this Jared as well, you're almost describing like getting out of your own way and then letting your craft come into its own rather than relying on big lights or whatever. Blackmagic 4K. Gang loom. LOL. Renting a Ronin 4D though. I mean, for me, when it comes to the stabilizers, I don't like them at all. Like I rarely use my Ronin, and it's just because it's just one more thing that goes wrong, and it goes wrong. Like you might, oh, it gets out of balance or whatever it is. Like you want to pull it off fast and you want to go get a shot and it's stuck. Like there's so many things, or the battery's out. And I don't know. There's always something happening. That's why I prefer the Easy Rig, because it is very similar. It's just more handheld vibe, and I usually have the Canon stabilizer on in my lenses just because of that. Because like when you have the Easy Rig, you want it to be a little bit more stable, and that helps with that when you shoot on the Pocket or the Ursa, whatever it is. Like it helps a lot to have stabilizer in the lens, and that's also a thing that I like. I've choose that lens because of that. It's easier to get stable shots that way than to have a stabilizer like the Ronin, for instance. I do have a Ronin. I've barely used it in like whatever years I've had it, and I've had so many versions of it. I was really early to adopt that tech, but I never got fond of it. Now we do use it when we run with athletes. We use the smaller versions because I think those makes more sense, and I like having, for instance, a setup with a Pocket 4K, because we have 3, I think. We put one of them permanently on one Ronin, or I think the Mosa Aircross sometimes, just because it's even lighter. So when you have that ability to have an extra camera that's always set up, then it makes more sense, 'cause you can just put it away and you can continue shooting. But my rig is so big because it has like several batteries, it has monitors, it has like a lot of audio. When we shot a Speedway series, I think I had 8 lavaliers going into the Pocket, but through a mixer. That was messy. Like that rig was massive. I gotta show it sometime. It was really big. But that was the situation I was in. I had to shoot all of them and hear what they said so that I could follow what was happening, because we were shooting these teams that was, I guess they were, how many are they? Like 7, I think they were in a team, and then the coaches, something like that. And then like having all those conversation going on, like everybody's in different places, just monitoring that. The labs did everything, but the way that we made that work had to do with like, okay, which lab do we use? It's super loud in one moment because they're like roaring engines driving on the track. The next moment, you go to like super quiet whispering almost as they're like very down and like they failed whatever they did, and they're almost not talking, like they're whispering almost. So then that dynamic range is crazy when it comes to audio. There's not a lot of things that will handle that well. So then we went with recording everything on Tentacle track E recorders. So we had, I think, 9 or so of those, and they had just come out, and they were time code. Like you can sync everything with time code. So we synced all of them at the beginning of the day, and then we shot for the whole day. Everybody had that mic on, and that, like, it got so much good material. It was amazing using it that way, because you could record everybody, and they were moving around in various situations, and like they forgot about being recorded. So we could be like 100 meters away with a zoom lens capturing what was going on, and there was a lot of action and like fighting and all that going on in this series. So it was amazing to capture all the intimate audio and discussions going on at the same time as we could, not be visible. So they didn't know that we were filming it, even though like they knew, but yeah, they forget about it. So that was one really useful tool, and I just love that one. But that's just a recorder, so you can't hear anything. So then we had to add, on top of that recorder, we had to put a Sennheiser system to send the signals wirelessly to me, or my camera, or the other DP's camera, because we had 2 that had audio hearing capabilities. We had 2 teams that we were following, and then we had like 2 or 3 sometimes, even more, I think, at some parts of the shoots. We had a lot of photographers or filmmakers that were filming just the race and that sort of thing. So that was like a really complex scenario, but I think everybody should own one of those. That's the best audio tool, because it has 32-bit float, which is basically a raw capabilities from video, but in audio. So you can get this super high dynamic range. Because the audio, for instance, if it's too loud, it won't peak. So you still can bring it down in post, almost always. I think always, in my case. But also the low is harder, because like if you're too far away from a mic, you get noise when you try to raise it up. Like the noise floor goes up with your voice. So it's more complex to save that. But either way, you have more detail to things. And like talking about mics, for instance, it just comes down to like 0.5 meter ish is the perfect distance. That's about, I don't know, an arm for you Americans, about that. 2 foot, maybe 2.5, I think. 2 foot. That's what distance you want to be from, the microphone at all times. And that means miking lavs right about here, because you don't want it to be too much up here, because then like it sounds like you're talking like that. And then like over here, yeah, it also messes up a little bit, because when they turn that way, then it's on this side. So those things you got to think about. Like if you put lavs, the ideal place is here, but I am probably one of the few that thinks that you should never hide it underneath. And that's also because in my experience, I cannot listen to everything. I cannot, like, even if I listen to it, I can't place that mic, in the critical moments, the intimate moments. I can't move it all the time. So there's just a risk involved in hiding a mic. And I don't want to take that risk. So I put them always on the outside, like always, and even with a windshield on. And it's ugly, I know, but who's gonna notice if the film is good? Nobody cares about that. If the film is good, nobody cares about it. If they start thinking about that, then your film should probably need a little bit more work. And that's what I think, like most people, they obsess about, like the aesthetics of that instead of the practicalities. Because I would rather have it visible at all times, just to like remove all chances of anything going wrong. And it's just because once that moment happens that you think is the dream moment that you've been waiting for months or years to happen in your doc. And if the audio is scratching then, or if whatever it is, the sound guy comes in and, yeah, let me just move this thing. No, that is not what I'm going for. So that's what I do. And then I have a different mic always on the camera. And that's usually a Sennheiser 416 because that's the standard dock mic. I don't know if anybody has more experience with newer mics, because that's the one that I have been taught is the best mic. Maybe it's changed, but it's a shotgun mic. It's really good. So even if I'm like basically standing over there in the far end, they're on the other side or whatever, like 25-ish meters, I don't know. If they're far away and it's still like decently quiet and all that, you still get really good audio, you know, depending on the situations, like how much noise there is around you and all that. So the thing is just like using that good mic, it buys you good quality audio just by using the right mic instead of using like a shitty Rode mic or whatever it is. I have an old Rode mic. I have like other Sennheiser mics, and they're not as good because they're not as directional and there's not as much, like the noise floor is higher and all those things. So it's just a better mic. So compared to like investing in a more expensive camera, I would like put the expenses to a Tentacle Track E recorder, and you know the kit lav is okay, but like DPA lavs are much better and smaller, and yeah, or the Sanken Koss lavalier mics, really good. Like I have those. I rarely use them anymore because I haven't adapted them to the Tentacle Track E recorders, but those are great. But I just think like these mics that you invest in, they're gonna last for like your whole career basically. So what is like $1,000? What is that then? Or whatever it is. I think these more expensive ones, like this is super expensive, but I bought this when we did like a feature film a long time ago. I think this is the MKH50. It's probably like 2,500 or something like that. It's super expensive. I would probably not buy that one, but it's nice to have when you have it, and it's expensive like to buy, but once you have it, like for whatever it is, 20 years that I've had it, like how much is it per year really? I use it for voiceovers, I use it for this. It's a good mic. Now you're not hearing it now because we're live streaming, but let me take some more questions. Let's see, Jared, poor things, the favorite limited self. Lol kid. Yeah, Jared, let me actually see. I can't control this freaking light. That's what annoys me, because like the light, like I could show you what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like this. This light is much better, but that's not what it looks like, because freaking YouTube. Let's see. Does it help me? No, it still brightens it. It's YouTube. The thing is, YouTube doesn't like when the background is so much, like it's so much darker, so it will just boost your face up. Stop that, YouTube. So Blackmagic's new iPhone app is really empowers and helps to make the iPhone more viable too. Yeah, I like that one. I like that one and the Filmic Pro app. Filmic Pro is really good as well. Like I think both of those are like killer tools for anybody working with iPhones. For me, I think the Blackmagic app, like there's always strengths and weaknesses in both. The Blackmagic app, I think, what was it that I liked more about that one? There was something that annoyed me with Filmic Pro. What annoys me is that I can't control the sharpness of the iPhone. That I think messes the most with using it, because you have to grade it so much to fix that, and it's not that easy. And also the challenges of shooting on the phones for me is always like the shifting, like when you run with somebody, you're running in the shade and sun, like mixed. The iPhone is not very good at that. So when you're running in the forest, that naturally happens. So it creates a lot of grading troubles. You can fix them, but if you're doing like YouTube shorts that we are doing, it, we don't really get paid to fix them. Like it's too much hassle to do that. If you were shooting a short film or whatever, or a feature film on an iPhone, whatever it is, then that would make sense to just go in and grade it and put more effort into that, because it is possible. It's just that you need to like animate the exposure and that sort of thing in post, which is a lot of work. And for a film that you don't really have time to go and do that, then it doesn't make sense. But I really like the apps because it just compared to now, I haven't used the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Is that what it's called? I don't know. I haven't used it yet, but I can imagine that it's very similar to the iPhone. But I don't think you can control it as much, because what I really like is just like working with, I can adapt in the Filmic Pro app, for instance. I can go in, maybe you can do this with a lot, I don't know, but you can like raise and lower like the dynamic range in terms of how it's exposed. Like it won't help your dynamic range, but it's not gonna like make too much contrast and have the highs be too high. Like you probably save a couple of percent doing that, I think. And it just like protects the highlights a little bit more. Like you can do that in the settings in a Filmic Pro app, while I don't know if you can do that in others. But that's what you need to do. You need to do everything you can if you use with these limited technologies. Everything has to be done to make it the best you can with like what you have. You have to just try to get the most out of everything, because there's no way that you're gonna make it look as good as a cinema camera if you're not pushing it to its very limits. Like everything needs to go your way if it's gonna compare. And like a lot of the time, I think it does a pretty well job. But you're not in a situation where you have leverage. Like you're always on the verge of failing at every moment. Like everything is so freaking close to not working out. And yeah, in a sense that's exciting, but it sucks as well. Let's see. Blackmagic new iPhone. Oh, that was the one we had. Yeah, because the D-Log is what changed everything for me. Like using that made me want to go shoot more on the iPhone. If they would let me control the sharpness, I think that would be a game changer, because that's the biggest problem as I see it with the phones. Do you clear away any expectations when you're first starting to develop an ID, or do you have a plan for packaging producers that may be interested, or distribution? Hey, Kriko. I mean, for me, I don't like, as I'm developing an idea or a project, I don't like getting ahead of myself with it. I like to be very patient with like what it's gonna turn out to be. Like usually, I would start filming something and see where it takes me, and I don't decide on what it is until like I've seen it and felt it. And usually it just comes down to like feeling the story and feeling like the vision of it. If you can see that when you're meeting the characters and you're filming it and you're experiencing it, when you start to sense that there is something there, that's really when it's the time to start thinking about like, oh, will this be something? Can I sell it? Can I pitch it? I don't think you should really pitch anything if you haven't filmed a little bit. Now I've sold projects that way, so it's not like it can't happen, but it's yeah. So I, for instance, the TV series I did, for SVT, which was based on like a dog I had that died, and I was pitching an idea of like, yes, I had this dog, a French bulldog. One moment. Grizzly. So he came at the end of that series. We bought him, and it was about smugglers coming to Sweden. It was Swedes, but a lot of the dogs came from outside of Sweden. So they were smuggled to Sweden. A lot of them got sick and killed, and I suspected that my dog was one of those dogs. So when we pitched that idea, I think it was so rare that and personal that they just felt that story was unique. And at that time, like, it was just very like quick. We were going in to pitch multiple ideas, like probably 10 or 20 of them. And that's the one that they were interested in. For some of the other ideas, we had done so much more research and so much more work, and they still didn't pick them. So like, it is possible to pitch that way, but then we had a track record and we had relationships with them in a way already, and then it makes it easier to do it. But that's the big difference, I think, when it comes to like pitching. If you have experience and you have the relationships and you have the trust, you can pitch anything with just a blurb. But if you're not there, then you gotta really make sure that the idea you're pitching is so clear and so close to what you want to make that like you get to make that. Because if you pitch something and it's too vague, or it's like, oh, it can be anything really, like those types of ideas, I've found that most of the time, like, they steal that idea. Not in terms that like they take it and make it themselves, but they will force you to make it how you perhaps don't want to make it. So that's the thing that I focus a lot on when I try to pitch ideas. I try to develop them so much that it's very clear what I'm pitching, so that they can't take it and run with it, and like twist it too much. Now, once you get into the editing, can happen anyway, but it just makes sense to shoot more and to be with your characters for a little bit, so you understand the story yourself before you pitch it, because you're gonna make a better pitch. You're gonna be able to tell a more detailed story and when you're pitching it. So usually I'd shoot maybe a day or a couple of days at least before I would like put something together. But that's usually how far I'll stretch it. Like maybe shoot like 3 days ish, perhaps. Not even that sometimes just one day. Now, if you have the time, you have like all the passion for it, then shoot for a week or shoot for a year. I don't know. You're always going to be pitching projects over and over as well. Like, you might stop pitching a project and then you might come back to it a couple of years later. That's what I'm thinking about now with this dog trafficking idea. It's not really that I feel like it's done. It's still a problem that's very common. So I feel like that idea still has life. I don't know when I would pitch it or how I would go about it, because you gotta find a new angle, because now it's several years later, but it's still a story that has so much more potential than I've tapped into in it. But then you're always looking for like new stuff, so I don't know. Jared, before you finish your stream today, I'd love to you taught us a Swedish saying or something, a fun phrase, or teach me a bad word. Gotta think. What bad word should we make you say that we say is a nice word? That's a big question. I guess like most people, how many has been to Sweden, first of all? There's, I don't know where I read this, but there's like, there was an article about fika in Sweden. I think it was like somebody from the US coming to Sweden explaining Sweden. No, actually, this is what made it viral this time. The prime minister, it's not a prime minister in Sweden, I don't know what it's called. Or is it? Maybe it is. Maybe I'm not too read up on things. He said to the French prime minister, because that's the prime minister at least, he told him about Sweden and about fika. There's a video about this that it's funny. And he was very serious, but it was a funny video at the same time. It went viral because it told us, or the people in France or him, about the Swedish culture around fika, and how like people expect you to eat fika. But then when you come here, like fika is coffee and like a bulle. What is it? Bulle is something that you can learn. It's like it's not a biscuit. It's like a soft biscuit. I don't know, but either way, he told him about like the rituals and the whole thing around fika, which just comes down to like fika is this thing that everybody expects you to do when you come to Sweden. You're expected to like go and fika. Because everybody does it. I don't do it so much. Well, I would drink coffee, but like for most of the people living in the city or working in a regular job or whatever it is, people go to a place and they have fika. They go to a meeting, they have fika all the time. It's like bulle and coffee. So that's expected of you to not go away and make a phone call or whatever it is. You're expected to be there and eat your bulle and drink your coffee. But then I read another article that was a funny twist on this, an American that had come to Sweden, which was talking about like, I think, or it was a book I read, but it was about like when you come to Sweden, the way that you meet a woman is not like you do in the US. You would go to the movies or go for dinner or whatever it is. You go for fika. That's what you do. So that's the way that you get introduced to the woman's family and all that as well. You would go for fika with that woman, and you would get invited home to that family and on fika. It's like this big cultural thing to have fika, as you might have imagined by now. But anyway, I will leave it at that. If you want to know more about documentary filmmaking, and if you want to learn how to pitch Netflix, then go to learndocumentary.com. Otherwise, is that how you met your lady? Fika, fika. Actually, I met her studying photography, still photography, before I became a filmmaker. Or maybe I was already. I don't know. I don't remember. It was 20 years ago, I think. Long time. Okay, anyway. This stream worked even though it crashed. See you next time, everybody. Let me know what you want me to talk about the next time. Okay. Now I just gotta figure out how to quit this. Maybe the X is a good button. Are you sure you want to stop streaming? Yes, sir.